Can you believe that the HOA team knocked on my door saying they had a warrant to search my house? It had been a week since the last HOA meeting, where I politely refused to sign a new set of bylaws that they had invented out of thin air. This regulation said, among other pearls, that the facade of the houses should have aesthetic neutrality characteristics. Aesthetic neutrality. This coming from a board of directors where the president wore starched beige pants with a brown leather belt and a lime green t-shirt tucked in. I refused. I said that my house was mine, and that the lilac bush I had planted in the driveway was nobody's business. The response? Forced smiles and that, "Oh, you'll see" vibe. It didn't take long. 4 days later, they were knocking on my door at 7:30 in the morning. I hadn't even brushed my teeth yet. When I opened it, I saw 3 people. One of them, the president of the HOA, the one in the beige pants. Another, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a How to Look Authoritative Without a Job catalog. And the third, a guy holding a briefcase and wearing a blazer 2 sizes larger than his body, all with their faces closed. The woman stepped forward, held up a piece of paper as if it were an Olympic trophy and said, "We're here to exercise the inspection warrant approved by the HOA board." I blinked. She repeated it. I blinked again. Guys, the paper was a sheet of sulfite with a table made in Word. At the top, a hideous coat of arms clearly copied and pasted from some public website. The font was Comic Sans. And underneath, a signature that looked more like a child's scribble trying to imitate what they see at the bottom of a school report card. The most unbelievable thing? They really thought they were right, that little piece of paper from elementary school gave them the right to enter my house as if they were agents of the law. I stopped for a second, trying to absorb it, not because of the threat itself, because I knew it was pure theater, but because of the audacity, the conviction. It was as if they had looked in the mirror in the morning, put on that power fantasy, and walked out into the street with the certainty that they were the new local justice task force. I asked if they were joking, and then it was the president's turn to speak, with that meek voice that tries to hide the venom. "If you refuse, we can apply administrative sanctions that include daily fines and even legal action." Legal action, according to him, based on a document that they themselves created, printed, and signed. A forged warrant that didn't even mention any real judicial instance. It was like someone knocking on your door saying they can arrest you because you got a 10 in your school essay. I said no. I said that if anyone tried to set foot inside my house, I would call the police. And that's what I did. I called. I explained the situation calmly, but made it clear that there was a group trying to enter my property on the basis of a document that they themselves had invented. Meanwhile, the 3 of them stood at the door, talking to each other, whispering, trying to decide whether they were going to try to force their way in or not. It took about 15 minutes, and then a car appeared, 2 policemen, and behind them, a car with a local court sticker. I thought it was strange, but I didn't question it. When the officers got out, the woman ran up to them with the paper in her hand. "Here's the warrant. We're just exercising a right." The policeman took the paper, looked at it. Then he looked at her. Then he looked at the paper again. And then there was silence. He asked, "Who issued this?" She said with all the calmness in the world, "It was approved at an HOA board meeting." The man let out a laugh so dry it sounded like he had choked on his own saliva. He called the other policeman over, and then the bailiff came. The real one. The guy in the car with the sticker, with a badge, official briefcase, neat clothes, and the look of someone who has seen a lot of bullshit in his life, but is still amazed at the level of human stupidity. He took the paper, read it, and said just one thing: "This is a fraud." The woman paled. The president of the HOA began to sweat. The third man, the one with the briefcase, literally tried to walk away slowly, as if he would disappear into the corner of the sidewalk. But it was too late. The officer gave an immediate order. He said that this amounted to attempted usurpation of public office, that falsifying an official document in order to deceive someone is a crime, and that the invasion, even if symbolic, could be interpreted as attempted housebreaking. Summary: in less than 5 minutes, the three of them were sitting on the sidewalk being interrogated, while I watched with a mug of coffee in my hand. The same coffee that a few minutes earlier I thought I was going to drink peacefully, but which turned out to be the soundtrack to an unforgettable morning. After that morning worthy of a trash movie script, I spent the rest of the day with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Relief because, thank God, common sense still existed in the form of a real bailiff. And disbelief because, honestly, I never thought I'd live long enough to see a bunch of adults trying to break into someone's house with a warrant printed out in Word and stamped with the seal of vanity. What nobody knew yet was that it was going to explode. And ugly. The three people involved were taken to the police station to give evidence. They weren't arrested on the spot with handcuffs and everything, but they were taken in on preliminary charges of attempted document fraud and usurpation of public office. And that magic word, usurpation, began to echo around the condominium with more force than any gossip about a non-standard fence or a badly painted garage. Of course, the neighbors began to comment, first in whispers, then in indirect questions, and then openly, and no wonder. The association had set itself up as the guardian of order, the institution that looked after good morals and the integrity of the neighborhood. And now, it was on people's lips as an amateur criminal organization, led by a group of people who thought that an episode of a legal series was a substitute for real legal knowledge. In less than 48 hours, the scandal was all over the condominium. Newsletters began to circulate. First, they tried to cover it up. The HOA is investigating the facts related to the incident that occurred with one of our residents, as if it were a fight over parking and not a failed attempt to break into someone else's home with a false document. But then came the counterattack, and it wasn't from me. It came from the town hall itself. Someone, I don't know who, but thank you very much, forwarded the formal complaint to the city's legal department, and there began an avalanche that nobody expected. What was supposed to be an attempt by the HOA to intimidate me ended up becoming an investigation into the functioning of the association as a whole. Because if they had the nerve to forge a warrant, what else were they doing behind the scenes? And that's when the Festival of Revelations began. A resident who never opened his mouth came forward with documents from a renovation that had been embargoed by the HOA itself on the grounds of facade incompatibility, but who now discovered that other residents had done something much worse and passed with quick approval, all because they had close ties to the board. Another showed that he had been fined for leaving a bicycle in the yard for 48 hours, while the association treasurer's house lived with a beach chair on the roof during the summer, and no one ever said anything. A silent revolt began to grow, the kind of revolt that grows from within, when people realize that they have spent years swallowing abuse disguised as rule. And now, with the scandal out in the open, no one could pretend they didn't know. The HOA was falling apart, and I was effortlessly right in the middle of it, not as the cause, but as the first domino they themselves knocked over. Meanwhile, the three of them, the president, the woman in the blazer, and the guy with the briefcase, disappeared off the map. Literally, they disappeared from the groups, the meetings, the morning walks, locked up at home, without the courage to step outside, because they knew that any step on the sidewalk would be followed by stares, whispers, judgments, power dripping through their fingers like wet soap. And they slipped pretty well. But what surprised me most was the number of people who came up to me, people who hadn't even looked at me properly before, who followed the rules with their heads down and their HOA bulletin under their arms. They came to apologize. They said that they had always thought it was too much, but that they were afraid to object, that they thought it was better to stay out of it. And deep down, I understood. Because these people had been conditioned to think that the association's system was immutable, that to disagree was dangerous, that to complain was to clash with a structure that could turn anyone's life into hell. But now, the structure was cracked, and the crack had a name, a surname, and a fake warrant to tell the tale. The best part? The real bailiff, the one who saved the country with his bored face and shiny badge, came back. He showed up at my door 2 days later. He knocked, introduced himself, and said he was there to thank me for my cooperation, and formally inform me that the case was now being pursued on the basis of an official complaint, and that, if I wanted to, I could file a personal lawsuit against those involved for attempted coercion and moral damages. He said this as calmly as someone offering a cup of coffee. And me? I smiled. That smile you give when you know that, for the first time in a long time, someone is going to have to swallow. The truth was that, after everything, it was no longer just a question between them and me. The whole fake warrant thing had exposed a much bigger problem. It was as if the impeccable facade of the condominium had begun to crack, and suddenly everyone began to realize that behind the white picket fence and the meetings with unsweetened coffee, there was a rotten system. And what's worse, supported by people who think they're too important to be questioned. The HOA has always been treated as a sacred institution here. Everything was decided by it, from the height of the bush on the sidewalk to the shade of the cement on the sidewalk. And many people accepted this because it was easier, because nobody wants to be the troublemaker. But now, even the quietest have started to raise their heads. After the initial shock and the formal visit from the real bailiff, I decided to act methodically. No shouting, no scandal on the sidewalk. That had already happened, and frankly, it had been enough to become the shame of the decade. Now it was time to break it down. I took paper by paper, rule by rule, and opened the Pandora's box that the association called its internal regulations. What I found was a legal carnival, invented clauses, absurdly vague terms, sanctions that changed according to the mood of the enforcer. I discovered that they had a spreadsheet with completely incoherent fine amounts. For example, leaving the doormat wet, 150 reais. Leaving garbage outside the garbage can for more than 5 minutes, 200 reais. Having a Christmas ornament outside the permitted period, 300 reais. That wasn't regulation, it was extortion. And since no one had ever formally challenged it, it became the rule. And as it became a rule, it became power. A power they used as they saw fit. One neighbor who didn't show up for any meetings had his car towed because it was outside the boundary line. Another was fined 3 times in 1 month because his dog barked. Detail: he doesn't even have a dog. It was the back neighbors, but the board claimed reasonable doubt, all documented with a stamp from the association itself. I took this dossier straight to the town hall. I sat down with an official from the legal department and spread the sheets out on the table. She gave me a look like she was trying to figure out if it was serious or just another conspiracy theory from a boring resident. But all she had to do was read the first 3 clauses to realize that it was ugly. Very ugly. She asked me to wait. She came back later with an inspector and a lawyer. They took copies of everything. They said they were going to open an administrative inquiry to investigate the workings of the HOA. And that's when I realized it had gone too far to be hushed up. Meanwhile, in the condominium, the pressure only increased. The 3 board members who had tried to break into my house were now completely isolated. Nobody spoke to them anymore. They disappeared from the groups. They had to cancel the monthly assembly because nobody showed up. And the few who still tried to defend them began to realize that they were on the wrong side of history. But then came the best, the rotten cherry on top of the stale cake. During the investigation, they discovered that the warrant they had used to try to break into my house had been printed on the printer in the association's own office. That alone was serious. But worse, it was the HOA president himself who created the document. He typed it up, formatted it, and signed it with a blue pen to make it look official. Yes, people, blue, because, according to him, a stamp and a blue pen give it more visual authority. the level of delirium. When the town hall found out about this, it decided to take measures in advance. An official team showed up at the condominium to carry out an extraordinary inspection. They asked for access to the HOA's physical archives, and there, the mess turned out to be complete. Unsigned documents, sheets with dates altered by hand, records of meetings that never took place, and even copies of fines imposed on residents based on verbal complaints. No photos, no proof, just, "I think." The lawyer who accompanied the team looked at me in a corner and said, "This is a bomb ready to explode." And she was right. In less than a week, the HOA's bylaws were suspended by the city council. The board was dissolved. The three of them were summoned to give new statements. And now, yes, they were being criminally investigated for falsifying a document, abuse of authority, and forming an irregular association. And what about me? I was there, watching it all like someone watching a house of cards fall down. Not because I was a hero, but because I was stubborn. Because I didn't accept bowing my head to a group of people who confused neighborhood association with the lifetime position of petty dictator. The most surreal thing was seeing the condominium in silence. That strange silence, laden with collective guilt, as if everyone knew that they had fed that system out of fear, convenience. But now the fear had changed sides, and there was still the final moment, which no one expected. Because when the house falls down, there's always one detail that escapes. And in this case, it was the detail that turned the shame into an official scandal. When the city council decided to suspend the HOA's bylaws and dissolve the board of directors, the entire condominium went into a kind of trance. It was as if the ground had disappeared from under everyone's feet, because, as much as no one liked the way things were run, everyone had gotten used to that system. It was like living with a constant headache. You forget it's hurting until the moment it goes away, and then you feel the relief. And that relief came strong. The three members of the old board now walked around the neighborhood like shadows. No more arrogant strolls with clipboard in hand. No more impromptu meetings in the central garden where, before, a whisper was enough to summon collective judgment on anyone who dared to plant anything that wasn't considered neutral. Now, they crossed their arms at the gate itself and avoided even exchanging glances with passers-by. But the real downfall came when the investigation found the spoiled icing on the already moldy cake. An invoice. Yes, an invoice. Simple, ordinary, unremarkable. Forgotten at the bottom of one of the association's physical folders. Apparently irrelevant. But when it was cross-referenced with other information, it showed what no one had imagined. That part of the money collected in administrative fines had been used to pay for a private construction project. Guess where? In the house of the HOA president himself. More than $5,000 were used to install a pergola in the backyard of his house. A beautiful structure made of varnished wood, with recessed lighting and everything. But, according to the receipt, that money came from the Emergency Common Area Maintenance Fund. The same fund that, according to the paperwork, should have been used to fix the sports court lights, which, by the way, had been burnt out for 3 months. When this came to light, there was no need for argument. The community, which had been shocked before, was now furious. It wasn't just about abuse of power, it was about theft, embezzlement, scoundrelry, a slap in the face to everyone who paid the extra tax, thinking they were contributing to improving the neighborhood, when in fact they were financing the gourmet corner of a tyrant in beige pants. The city council called an emergency meeting. It wasn't optional. It was a formal notice under the door with a date and time. And there I was, sitting in the front row, along with other residents who, until then, had never been involved in anything. But now they were there, with their chests open, ready to understand what else had been hidden from us. The lawyer in charge of the investigation presented a report. Objective, blunt. She said that the 3 members of the old board were being prosecuted, that their personal assets were being analyzed in court as a guarantee of reimbursement, to the association's fund. That new elections would be held under the supervision of the town hall itself, with a new statute, this time legal, transparent, and overseen by an independent committee of residents. The mood was one of relief, yes, but also one of revolt, because people realized that, for too long, they had silently accepted abuses disguised as organization, that they had given up their common sense in the name of a false order. And all it took was for someone to say no, and stick to that no, for everything to start falling apart. After the meeting, I was stopped by at least 10 people. Some of them had never spoken to me before. They came to thank me. Others apologized for not having supported me before, and I understood. Because it's hard to be the first to stand up to a system that trains you to be obedient. But now, there was no turning back. The old board was officially banned from holding any community management position for 5 years. One of the members even tried to appeal, saying he was just following orders. He was ignored. The president disappeared. The woman in the blazer sold her house and moved out in less than a month. And the third, the one with the briefcase, ended up staying. But he was never seen in the common areas again. And me? I painted my door red, bright red, the kind they would call overly flashy at meetings. I planted 2 more rows of lilac bushes and put a rocking chair right in the middle of the balcony. And every time someone walks past, they greet me. Not with that forced smile from before, but with respect, with that look that says, "We saw it, and you put up with it." Because in the end, it wasn't just about my house, it was about everyone. It was about putting a stop to it. It was about remembering that no matter how much they try to intimidate you with false paper and a face of authority, those who have the truth on their side don't have to bow down. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave your like and comment below.